Welcome back to the Aussie Shed, ladies and gentlemen, for part 2 in the 20-ton press upgrade. We're back working on trying to invert this 20-ton air over hydraulic jack. A few bits and pieces have turned up. I have a foot actuating valve here, which is going to replace the hand operated valve here, so that once it's set up in the press, there'll be a foot switch, which will be much easier, meaning that you can just use both hands when you're pressing stuff, which is a really big advantage. So basically we'll just unscrew this, put a fitting on and run down the press to this, and where our air goes, and voila. But what I am about to do is a bit of work on our fluid vessel here. You can see I've already taken off the handle that was on the side. It was just a bit of bent wire that was really badly welded on there. And now what I'm going to do is, I think I'm going to remove this rubber plug down here and weld up the hole, and then put a new fitting on the top here, and possibly weld a nut and put a bolt onto it, so that when we are inverted, our fluid level will be up here to be able to fill it. And yeah, and I also have something else in mind for this fitting up here as well. So yep, that's what I'm about to do, folks. So I'll just clean all this up with a wire wheel or something, and we'll look at what we're going to do with that. That should do that, I think, folks. Just just a nut welded on. Yeah. So that, obviously, when the thing sits in this position here, got a bit of a cut down nut for it. That just becomes our fill and drain valve right there, or our fill and drain port, I should say. So that'll be our oil level. Basically we'll be just up to the bottom of that. The oil level in this can be basically anywhere as long as you've got enough oil in there, which this should guarantee me enough oil in there. And there's also another modification that I'm planning on doing to this. You can see there where I welded up the original hole there, it's a bit low. It was actually bent in there quite a bit. That hole had actually been punched out, it wasn't drilled out. So it was quite low, but I'm going to actually take all the paint off this and repaint it anyway, so I'll just put a bit of body filler in that before I paint it to just make it look a little bit smarter. So yeah, that's I think that's pretty much all the modifications to this cylinder, other than a little thing I've got to do to that and just a bit of paint work. So that's pretty much done now. Next thing I'm going to do, folks, is drill some holes in this base plate so I can bolt through into the other plate that's going to be welded onto the press, and I'll just tap the holes in that. So I just need probably 4 mounting positions. There's threaded holes here for these spring tensioners, so I've got to avoid those. But I'll just drill 4 new 8mm holes just for an 8mm bolt. There's no pressure on these. It's really just to hang the jack. Obviously, when you're pressing, the force is in the other direction. It's pushing it into the plate, so these are really just to hold it in position. It's only cast iron, folks, so it drills really easily, as you can probably see. There we go, that's our holes. 1, 2, 3, 4. All set up, ready to bolt through into a plate. So I've been having a bit more think about the ramifications of inverting this hydraulic jack. Particularly what I've been focusing on has been the fluid movement throughout the unit, and if there will be any adverse effects from it being upside down other than the sort of dip tubes that I've already discussed earlier. So I was kind of thinking, well, if the fluid sits up to the old fill port position, that's what actually got me thinking about this, was the fact that I've inverted the fill port position and everything. I thought, okay, well, obviously above that is air, and I was thinking, well, what happens to the relationship between the air and the fluid as the jack operates? Well, obviously, as you pump the jack up, the reservoir supplies the hydraulic fluid to the piston, so the fluid level in the reservoir goes down as the piston goes up. But that also means that the volume of air inside the vessel has to either increase or it gets pulled into a vacuum. Now, I would assume that pulling it into a vacuum is no good, so therefore there must be a way for air to be drawn in to this. And also, when the opposite occurs, when the piston is fully extended, the fluid level will be down here, and then when the piston gets pushed back down, your hydraulic fluid moves back up. So what happens to the air that's left in the top of the vessel here? Well, obviously it either gets compressed or it gets forced out. And then I thought, aha! So that's where the farting noise comes from when you push the cylinder back into a hydraulic jack. It makes a horrible sort of an air, like almost a farting noise when you do that. So I think, okay, well, that must be the air escaping. So because the thing's in pieces, I thought I'd look a bit further into it. And what I found is there is a hole in the top of this retaining collar up here, which I assume is responsible for everything that I've just discussed. Now, you can see the location of it inside here. It is just above the threads, and there is also no seal on this face here, which seals against the top of the hydraulic cylinder or goes up against the top of the hydraulic cylinder, but there is no actual seal in there, whereas this section here has a seal on it. That's the seal there. You can't really tell it's a seal because it has paint on the outside. There you go, that gives you more of an idea on it. There you go, that's your seal around the outside that seals the vessel. So as you can see, the hole is under the seal and it is open to the top of the vessel inside there. So that leads me to believe that this is the vent that allows movement of air above the hydraulic fluid in the jack to compensate for the piston being moved up and down. And because that sits below the wiper O-ring on the piston there as it moves up and down, I assume that is the sort of horrid farting sound that you hear is the sound of air rushing into here, being forced through and between that wiper O-ring around the piston there as the hydraulic cylinder goes back down. And because of the relative slow movement of the jack being raised, it would explain why you don't hear anything on the other side of it, like when the jack's being raised up, you don't really hear sort of a sucking sound of the vacuum being drawn through, which sort of makes sense to me. So for me, I think that explains the movement of the fluid and air sort of relationship to each other as the cylinder displaces air and all that kind of stuff. Which begs the question, so how is this design changed if I invert the jack? Well, it changes in a big way, because obviously it's no longer able to work as a breather for the jack, because it will be permanently submerged in the bottom of the hydraulic fluid. So it could create two situations. It could create a situation where either when the piston is returned into the hydraulic jack, instead of it forcing air out, because the air will then have nowhere to go because this end of the jack is sealed, it'll then force hydraulic fluid past the wiper O-ring and out through the jack. And it also means, on the other hand, that it will be trying to pull air in through the same way and then up through the hydraulic fluid, which is just not going to work. Which is probably why when you have a hydraulic jack stored on its side, it gets a bit messy. And I know this because I keep a hydraulic jack stored in my work van, and the only way I can store it is on its side, and I keep a rag wrapped around it because it does get very messy, you know, like it just leaks a little bit of fluid and it ends up quite oily and greasy. Not a massive amount, but enough to be a pain in the bum, and I assume that this is why. How I'm going to get around this, I think, is I'm going to seal this. If I seal this up with Celastic, I should be good to go. And really the only way in then, once that's sealed up, is for hydraulic fluid to travel up through the threads. So I think what I'll do is I'll put thread sealer on this, not Loctite, but just a thread sealer on this, and possibly maybe smear a little bit of Celastic down in the bottom of there first. I don't know, but either way, as long as that thread is sealed up to prevent fluid, you know, moving through the thread, and as long as that is closed up to prevent fluid going through that hole, I think we should be good to go. Which then leaves the issue of, okay, well then, you've inverted the jack and you've stopped the potential for leaks in that area due to the way the thing's been designed. How do you then compensate for the air that's going to be wanting to be drawn in or compressed when the jack goes through its motions? So this is what I've done, folks. This is the bolt that goes in my drain and fill hole, and I've drilled a 1/16 hole through that, as you can see right there. So what that'll do, hopefully, is because your oil level will then be up to here, and as the jack goes through its motions, that fluid level will be moving here, and this little tiny hole there should be able to draw in air as the fluid's decreased in this vessel, and then also expel air as the fluid returns. So I'm sure I will, as the jack is moved, I will be able to hear that. And I would assume that the size of that hole will possibly regulate how quickly the piston returns under the force of the springs that pull it back, because other than moving the fluid back, the fluid then has to fight compressing the air and forcing the air out through that hole. So I may need to make that hole slightly larger if I find that the piston's returning slowly, compared to, for example, if I just take the bolt right out and there is no restriction. If there's a difference between the two, I will just enlarge this hole to a point where there's no difference in piston movement between having the bolt in or out. Now, it won't leak because obviously the jack's permanently going to be mounted in that position. It's not like it's going to be laying on its side at any time, so it shouldn't be an issue. So that's where I've arrived at anyway with it, folks. So hopefully I'm on the right track and it's all going to work. So yeah, I'm just trying to kind of think of anything that could become a potential issue, which may lead me having to re-modify it, because I want to obviously get the thing together and paint it and assemble it all in one go and not have to pull the damn thing apart again because there's something I've missed. And I think if I hadn't sort of thought about that and, you know, worked out the go with this, I think that is something that definitely would have been an issue. The jack may have dripped oil from around here, or it may have forced oil in and out. Like, you know, obviously there has to be somewhere for the air to go, whether it's vacuum or whether it's being compressed, and I'm pretty confident that that is what the manufacturers have worked out as being the easiest way to create a passage for air movement without fluid leak, due to the fact that it's above the fluid level and it's under the wiper O-ring, so it can just kind of you know, work as it would. Pretty confident that I've nutted it out in the right way, folks. Let's move on to the next thing. So I've run into a slight problem, folks. I can't get the main cylinder here off. No matter what I do, I cannot unthread it from the base here, so I'm going to have to sort of work around that. And what I want to do next is I want to cut a thread down in this hole here that feeds this pump, and in this hole here that on there that feeds this pump. The problem is going to be the swarf that's generated when I tap the threads, but I think I can get over that by taking this pump out and taking the air pump out, and because that is a suck into the pump hole, I think once I have both of those pumps removed, I can then use a syringe to suck fluid back through this hole once I tap it and pull it into a syringe and get rid of it, because it will have debris from when I tap these holes in it, which I don't want to be recirculated through the rest of the pump. So that's my solution at this stage, just to take the two pumps off, tap the holes, and then pull it through before it gets pushed back through into the actual hydraulic cylinder there. So that's what I'm going to do, folks. Take that off, take that off. So you can see the tap's pulling most of the crap out, folks. I've got a neodymium magnet here that I'm just sort of putting on the tap when I extract it, and I'm also using a small drill bit in and out of the hole to just sort of try and keep the whole area as clean as possible. Once I get the holes fully tapped out and everything, I'll use a syringe with a bit of tubing on it, and I will flush both of these holes out back into the pump areas and hopefully stop any crap going into the main cylinder. Because as I say, I can't get the main cylinder out to sort of clean it out, so I've just got to make sure that nothing gets in there. So I'm just starting on the dip tubes. You can see I've already got one here. It's got a thread cut on it, so it's a 6mm thread that I'm using here that I've tapped down into the base of the jack there. And this is just some 1/4 inch aluminium tubing that I've then just turned down slightly. It's about 6.3mm. I've turned it down on my mini lathe to about 5.9 and then just cut a thread on the end of it. As you can see there, that just screws down into there, and that'll be Loctited in position when the time comes, along with this one on the back here, which I'm about to make. So come with me over to the mini lathe, folks, and I'll just turn this one down and put the thread on the end of it. And there you go, folks, that's the second one done. Just give it a little bit of a deburring on the end. Just make sure it's all nice. Quick blowout with the air hose. We should be looking pretty good. I'll just take the air pump off here so you can see. That one should go down in there. Fantastic. You'd almost think that was made to do that. Next thing I've got to do is work out the exact height for these dip tubes, cut them off. It's just a matter of Loctiting these guys down then, and I think we're ready to, well, we're almost ready to assemble it then. Rightio, so I'll work out the height, cut them off, and I think we're ready to put it together. Okay, so they're now cut to length and all cleaned up and ready to just throw a bit of Loctite on. And let's put them in, eh? They will actually help me a little bit too with cleaning these out. I've actually gone to quite an effort to make sure that these areas are cleaned out after I tap them, other than using a magnet, as you saw, on the end of the tap, and also a magnet on the end of a drill bit, just kind of reaming it up and down in there to get everything. I've also used some cotton ear cleaner things down in there with some cleaning solution and stuff on them, and they seem to be really clean. But what I'll do, once I get the dip tubes in, I'll fill them with hydraulic oil, and then I'll put my my air blower on them, and I'll just force them through and put a rag in here and clean it out. I don't think I'm going to get anything out of them though, because they are just so clean. So let's just Loctite these guys in for now. That's one. That, folks, is number two. So there we go. So at this stage, folks, I'm pretty happy with the progress so far, so I might leave this video here. and then we'll carry on from here in the next video. So in the next video we'll start the reassembly process and further modifications. So as always folks, thanks for stopping by the Aussie Shed. Pleasure to have you here. Remember to like and subscribe, and if you like this video, remember to come back for the next installment, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.